Hello, everybody. We have just opened up our webinar. So if you are joining, please pop your name in the chat there. And we're very excited. We're going to be starting off in 2 minutes. We've promised an on-time departure today. And we'll be chatting for about 50 minutes today with some very, very famous people in the people space. So welcome if you are joining. Hello, Andrea. And our topic today, of course, is how people teams accelerate business success. And we've had some nice reach outs from people in the HR space, some CEOs, some folks who are in the executive looking. Oh, thank you, Andrea. we hate please. And we're coming in from the UK today, from California, from Portland, from New York. So we're kind of all over the planet. So welcome if you are with us. And if you would like to comment, I know lots of people in the people space don't like to necessarily comment, but if you'd like to say who you are and where you're from, please feel free to add that into the chat. And if you do have any questions of this panel, Lucy and I will keep an eye on the chat, and we're happy to answer those questions as we go through. So very excited if you've just joined us. Hi, Alex, Cleveland, Ohio. I've never been there. I must visit. Great to have you on. If you have any questions, let me know, and we're going to start in a few seconds, and I'll introduce our team for today. And might I suggest also...
I don't know what that is, but I really want it.
That's definitely a yes from me too. Okay, so people, Lucy, are you good if we start?
Yeah, I think we're good to go. We're recording, so let's do it.
Wonderful. Well, look, hello everybody, and welcome to this webinar, which is hosted today by Good Soul Hunting. So that's Lucy, Adi, and myself. So we are a boutique search agency, and we specialize in purpose-driven brands, bringing on game-changing talent, and mainly in the health and fitness sector, but sometimes a little adjacent to that. My name is Emma Barry. I'm really excited to be your moderator, your host today, and together with Lucy Adi, who's our Chief Executive Soul at Good Soul Hunting, we're very happy to have you on this webinar. And we've got two amazing guests who I'm going to introduce in a minute. But before we go there, Lucy, perhaps give us some perspective. Why are we doing this webinar today, and why now?
Yeah, well, Em, as you know, my background before Good Soul Hunting was HR. So that was what I was doing day to day, working directly with CEOs and executive leaders all around the world. And I've been watching over the last 3 years all of the things that all the HR people have had to be dealing with over, COVID, everything that's come out of it, wars, recessions, multi-generational, teams. There's all kinds of things that HR is having to deal with at the moment that, to be honest, I'm sitting here being almost thankful that I wasn't having to deal with. And so what I've been thinking is that probably nobody's had any time for any personal development of their own, because you're literally putting out fires left, right, and center. So we're here for you, and we really wanted to just create an opportunity and a bit of space for you to take an hour to have some personal development. And so that's why we're here. Our topics are really key topics that we've been hearing from our clients are important. So DEI, mental health, etc., future trends. But something that I was really passionate about was wanting to chat about the relationship between HR and the executive team or CEO, which is why we have Bryan and Andrea here to bring different perspectives. And certainly in my HR career, that was something that was really important, really added a lot of value to the business and to my own career. So that's why I'm personally passionate about having this discussion as one of our topics.
Thanks, Lucy, for that perspective. So without further ado, we have royalty in the house today, two proven leaders, both passionate advocates for elevating diversity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace. So first of all, let's welcome Bryan Myers, who's the president and CEO, and if you can't see it blazoned across his chest, solidcore, which is an incredibly successful brand, which we're going to hear a little bit about in a minute, is an experienced, results-driven senior strategic leader with a demonstrated track record in leading high-growth brands as well as providing strategic consulting services for senior executives for Fortune 500 companies. So very skilled in strategy development, business transformation, organizational design, corporate development, and analytics. A lot of really great skills, which we're going to bring to this conversation today. Fresh from presenting at URSA, which is a fitness industry event which happened in San Diego, currently in New York. Welcome, Bryan, to the call today. So where are you coming from, and what is your focus at the moment here in 2023?
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where in the world you might be watching the webinar from. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here, Emma, Lucy. Thank you for having me. Andrea, so excited to be here on this panel with you. I am coming live from New York. I'm actually based out of the DC area, but I'm coming at you live from my hotel room in New York City, where I'm traveling and spending some time with our team. Speaking of the people-related topic, for me, 2023 is really about capitalizing on the success that our businesses had coming out of the pandemic, and specifically thinking through how we make sure we have the right processes and, importantly, people to deliver the business goals that we have. We have a big year in front of us and a lot of really, really big goals that we're after as a company, and super excited to talk through a little bit of that and how we're approaching that.
Thanks, Bryan. Welcome. Also, welcome to Andrea Herron, Head of People at WebMD, another incredible executive operating strategically, specializing in executive coaching, culture change and alignment, and deep M&A facilitation. Now, Andrea brings and strives for values-driven leadership, which we're going to hear about. Also believes in a decent dose of humor, which we love, much needed in these times, I have to say. A published author, and we're going to do a little shout out here. I think you've got your book there too. Look at that. Amazing. Read it yesterday. Highly recommend you read that one. We'll put that in the notes for sure. And also host of an award-winning podcast, HR Scoop, addressing mental health in the workplace. And we were just saying before the webinar, before we started recording, how Andrea's really focusing on being a voice for these issues in our workplaces. So we'll hear more about that. Voted top woman in wellness and HR by Reagan, and top leader in DEIB, and that was an award by Mogul. So congratulations, welcome to the call. And Andrea, tell us what you're focusing on at this point in 2023.
Thank you. So happy to be here with you all. I'm from Portland, and Lucy, I just want to say 1,000% yes to everything you said earlier. It's been a time for sure for HR people. And I think taking that and looking at 2023, my word is flexibility. What I want to focus on is how can we create more flexibility for the whole human and how they show up in work, and how can we make work more flexible to everyone's benefit. Not just for the benefit of the employee, but how can it be a win-win? So my 2023 word is flexibility.
Love that, and thank you. So for the both of you, we're going to start at 10,000 feet. We're going to be talking about the HR exec relationship, and I'll start with you, Bryan. So at 10,000 feet, let's consider the importance of a strong people function within a business, and specifically the HR exec relationship, you being a CEO. So Bryan, how vital is a strong HR team leader relationship to business success?
Yeah, look, I really could answer this with 2 words by just saying it's super critical, but I'll add a little bit of color to that and say, look, especially in our business where, for those of you who don't know what solidcore is, we operate a chain of roughly 100 fitness studios. And so our people are delivering our products, and our people strategy is integrally related and critical for us to be able to deliver that product successfully in a way that inspires consumers to continue to come back. So for me, the relationship that I have with my people leader and how we think about attracting talent, assessing talent, motivating talent, compensating talent goes hand in hand with my relationship with my chief financial officer and how we think about growing revenue, sustainable business, investments, etc. Those 2 things are inextricably linked. And so that relationship, like I said, is super critical.
Thanks, Bryan. And then Andrea, one focused more on your direction. What impact does it make on business success to have a CEO or exec leader that believes in the importance of HR?
Super critical. I mean, you can't have successful people initiatives if you don't have support from the top. I think we all know that intuitively. I mean, almost nothing really happens if there isn't leadership support. But I think it's especially important when you're talking about the HR or people related initiatives, because there is a huge component of psychological safety. And I mean, we all know this, right? If you have this amazing program that the HR person rolls out, but you know the top leadership is not into it, maybe you start to feel like, oh, if I participate, is that going to look bad? If I actually take my time off, will I be indirectly punished for that? You have to have buy-in and support and a good working, visible relationship with visible support for people to feel like they can even participate in what you're offering. And so that relationship, in my opinion, cannot be underestimated, because you will fail without having that not only support, but visible buy-in and support.
I love that. So it's got to be authentic, real support, not just the party line, right? Because everyone's
people can see through that. Absolutely.
Yeah, they can. So this is one for both of you. Let's think about an example, perhaps a time where, and Bryan, I'll start with you, where you've been in flow with the business and getting great results, and then perhaps the opposite when it hasn't been going well.
Yeah, I'll build on a little bit of what Andrea was just describing, because I think when a people executive relationship is really in flow is one where that people leader and that executive leader are really speaking with one voice, even if they don't necessarily agree on everything, right? And I think the thing that Andrea said is, like, it's really important for those relationships to be strong, but I also want to make sure that people don't walk away thinking, oh my gosh, as a people leader, I always have to agree with my executive sponsor, or as an executive sponsor, I always have to agree with my people leader. I actually have found that some of the best ideation that we've had at solidcore has come at moments where there's actually been strong disagreement around the table of how we approach something and how we show up for our people, and what does it mean to motivate, and is that going to actually get it done? So I wanted to make that point, but I think in general, when you have big goals and you have big aspirations, making sure that you can align those business objectives, those business metrics, to the people strategy and the execution that it's ultimately going to take to get there. And I think when the people leader is able to not just, I think there's kind of sometimes this connotation around people leaders or HR leaders that they almost want to baby people, or they want to coddle people. And I think it's when that people leader can really step into their role while also recognizing what the business goals and objectives are, and they can bring those things together and find that sort of perfect intersection where we can really show up big and meaningfully for our people, and that actually enables us to deliver above and beyond for the business. That's when you really find that deep flow, at least that I found in my relationship with my people leader.
Great. And then perhaps, do you have an example, Andrea?
Sorry, was that for me or for Andrea?
Sorry, did you have an example, Andrea? Sorry,
it glitched on me. Yes to everything Bryan just said, and something just a tactical example that will highlight a good flow with my leader has actually been using the improv model, yes and if you're not familiar with improv, the actors are told to build on each other by saying yes and to add to the scene, and never to just say no, because it shuts down the scene. And I think this ideation that Bryan was talking about and culture building, it takes a lot of back and forth, absolutely. And if you can build on each other's ideas without shutting the other person down, you're going to get to a better result and come out with a good product, but also as stronger partners. Because if we're just saying yes, 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 well, that's not true ideation. That's just groupthink. And so you should have your own opinion. That's what you're there to do. But by saying, yes, we could do that, and it might look like this, or yes, we could, and this would be the consequence. So I'm not saying you have to just blindly agree, but learning each other's style and working through that relationship by building and trial and error has worked really well for me.
That's great. So two things I want to pick up on this point. One is we don't always have to agree. And I think that's awesome, because then we can bring our authentic selves. If you've all got the same decision, you only need one person in that room, really. So we're all there because of those decisions. So I love that. Perhaps something for you both, and I don't know who wants to answer this. I love the yes and, not but or not shutting down. But there does come a time where a decision has to be made. So how do you then take everyone on that, knowing that maybe most are for and some are perhaps against? How do you then garner support going forward so that everyone is behind the initiative, even if I didn't believe it or agree with it in the first? Just some advice from you both on that.
Yeah, I think you have to build a strong culture of what we call at solidcore, and I know a lot of leaders use this notion of disagree and commit. And I think when you have that culture, no matter who is ultimately responsible for the decision, even as CEO, I don't take lead on every single decision. Frankly, there are very few decisions where I say, I'm actually going to make this one, right? I like to really empower my team of leaders. That's why they're in their roles. But I also know if I disagree with my people leader, if I disagree with my marketing leader, but they are ultimately responsible for that decision, it's disagree and commit. And I bring all of my enthusiasm, support, resources. When we walk out of that room, we are one team and one dream. And that to me is really critical to getting that sort of forward momentum, so that you don't find that disconnect between leader and people executive.
Love it. Anything to add there, Andrea?
Honestly, that is exactly what I would recommend also, and just set that ground rule or that intention up front. So it's not at the end, somebody didn't get their way, and then you're like, oh no, but you have to disagree and commit after. You kind of all go into it, because over time, everyone's going to be in that position at some point. And so absolutely, that tends to work the best from what I've seen also.
Great, thanks. And then just before I cross to you, Lucy, just one more question for you both. When things aren't going great, what are some of the early indicators that you think, oh, this is about to derail, or we're about to go from a good positive space into something more negative? Andrea?
Yeah, sure. So the number one red flag, hot tip I could give everybody, use it today. If you are going back and forth in email or chat more than twice, if people are writing paragraphs and you are going back and forth more than twice, stop immediately and get on a phone call or a video call and talk voice to voice, because there is no tone, there is no attitude. We just project our own human emotions onto the words we see, and that can deteriorate a relationship so fast. And if you just call, don't even turn your camera on if that's not your thing, but talk voice to voice, you will get through it quicker and you will not derail that relationship as much. And you'll probably patch it up and move on faster than if you keep going down the rabbit hole of the email and it just escalates.
Love it. Bryan, anything to add?
Fully agree with that. And I would add that question that my team probably gets tired of me asking, but I always ask because there's so many times when I found disconnects that are rooted in this, which is, what is the question that we are ultimately trying to solve? And I repeat that a lot with my team, because so often the disagreement or the disconnect that you find amongst team members, HR or otherwise, lands in this space that we are actually trying to answer or solve slightly different questions. And that's why we can't find alignment. And then when you get clarity on that question, all of a sudden the path forward becomes much more clear.
Love it. Two fantastic tips. Lucy, of the clients we serve in the search space across different organizational structures and relationship mixes, what observations and watch outs are you seeing?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is the most profitable and successful businesses that we partner with, without exception, and not saying there won't be any exceptions in the world, but for who we partner with, they always have a rockstar HR leader or team, obviously depending on the size of the business. So that is a definite for us, and you really see that come out in how you work together. So I think a key watch out there is for businesses to time it right when to bring in an HR leader. And I think that's something that a lot of brands struggle with, because they may feel that, and I think a lot of leaders may have perceptions about HR. It might be based on someone they've worked with previously that maybe wasn't a good fit for their business, or just their own personal feelings. And so they'll maybe delay too long to bring in the right HR person when you really see the impact of that. And so in terms of the impact, when either there isn't a great HR team in place or HR and the executive are not in lockstep, we really run into issues from a recruitment perspective. So you see it come out in what is an incredibly important part of your business, right? Bryan, you were talking before about you have to have the right people to deliver this brand experience at solidcore, because that's your business. So it's super important piece of the puzzle is the recruitment process. And this is where we see whether there's a great kind of partnership there. And when it is really impactful, some of the things that we're seeing are really clear expectations on the role and actually what we're looking for, a really locked down interview process that has an amazing candidate experience as well. Really effective decision making, you see that come through. And then from a recruitment perspective, the end result of that is we see a quicker time to fill, quicker time to fill with a higher caliber of candidate. So that's just one example of how that plays out for us, seeing it from the recruitment perspective. And then I think one other thing that I think is really interesting is that we're now starting to see senior talent is actually asking us when we're presenting an opportunity to them, they're starting to ask about the HR executive relationship, because they're seeing it as a sign of whether this is a great culture, is this a great leader? And I thought that was just really interesting that I'm just starting to see that pop out as we're chatting with people.
Thanks, Lucy. So I'm looking for 2 tips from each of you before we close off this topic. 2 practical tips. I'll start with you, Bryan, that you'd like to share with our audience to help them create a better relationship between HR and the exec team to achieve better business results. What would be your top 2?
Yeah, I'm actually going to try to give one. It's multi-layered, but it's really one tip, which is to think through investments in your people, aka in the people function, in the HR function, the same way that you would think about any other investment in the business. And so it should have a vision that it's trying to achieve. It should have outcomes and metrics that's associated with it. If the typical way you make decisions is on a matrix of level of effort versus level of impact, we should be thinking about and prioritizing the way that we invest in our people in the exact same way. And I think people using that common language, again, will help get to a place of alignment much more quickly and with less friction.
Thanks, Bryan. And I love how you always break my rules. I ask for 2, you give me 1. I ask for something, you give me something else. I love it. I'm just having you on. Andrea, what would your top 1 or 2 be?
Mine is somewhat similar. I guess technically it could be 2, but really prioritizing regular check-ins with your executives and not just the to-do list. It is easy to come just with metrics, but you need to get to know each other and figure out things that will help you work better together. So for example, does that leader, how do they like to receive information? Do they like long form, bullet points, summaries, charts, just having tactical information about, do they like one-off pings? Do they want to wait for the meeting? Do they want to chat, email, text, video? So basically, like any relationship building, you need to understand how and in what modes they like to give and receive information. And then building on that, my second tip would be the more you can use that to anticipate what someone is going to need to make a decision or how they like to have that communication, you're going to be able to build better working relationships. And if you can get to the point where you know in advance and you can be proactive in giving them the updates, that will go a long way to build trust that you know it, you have it, they don't have to worry about it. And when you build that trust, you are going to have a much more successful and smoother relationship because they know they can count on you. So learn how they like to communicate and try to anticipate ways you can be proactive, really in any relationship, but especially with your leaders would be my top 2.
Great. Thank you so much. So great advice. Lots of tactics there to apply. So we're going to shift now to diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. So Bryan, I'll start with you. What DEIB initiatives have you implemented that have been the most successful in your view?
Yeah. I will follow instructions this time, and I will list a couple of initiatives. I honestly think our biggest initiative was, we really have just made it a point that in all of the things that we are doing, and I'll give you some tactical examples, we've ensured visibility of diverse and inclusive individuals, whether that be in roles in leadership, whether that be in our marketing, whether that be in partnerships that we're forming. And where we went with that was the number one thing that people want to see are people who match similar stories and similar backgrounds. And so we've worked with great firms, including Good Soul Hunting, to find amazing candidates who are incredibly talented and will deliver on behalf of the business results, while also bringing a new and different perspective to the table that we might not have had around the table before. And like I said, that shows up in our marketing collateral. It shows up in, again, partnerships that we form with different organizations, and everything in between. Then the second thing that we thought about was, how do we take our own commitment to DEI and use that to spread its tentacles into other organizations that we may be associated with? And we actually implemented a value statement that speaks to what's important to us as solidcore from a diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging perspective. And we require any major partner that we're working with, whether it's, hey, we're looking at bringing on a new investor, to, hey, we have a new person who's going to be providing water at our studios, and everything in between. And they are required to review and sign our value statement. And it's a really important stance for us to take, to say, it's not just okay that within kind of the 1,000 or 1,500 employees who work at solidcore that we're going to do the right thing. It's really important for us to also, in some ways, force that commitment onto other people so that we can maximize the level of impact that we're able to have as an organization.
Love that. Andrea?
Oh, that is a good one. One thing that we have done that I would highly recommend, and everybody can do no matter how big or small your business is basically do an audit. Step back and take a hard look at your entire employment life cycle. So start from your careers page. What images are on there? Do you have diversity represented? Are you ADA accommodating? Do you have captions on any videos that you have? I mean, really look at what people see when they come in. And then where are you recruiting? Are you expanding your reach into all sorts of areas that you may not get if you just post on your site? All the way to when someone's hired, yay, you made some progress on your diversity goals, but what happens to that employee's experience when they get there? Are they alone? Are there groups? Are there people that are represented? What holidays are you celebrating? What are you not celebrating? Really looking at your structure, your policies, and how the reality of different perspectives would experience your company. And then, you could even do special interest groups and get those started. If you want an A+, you put budget behind those special interest groups so people can use education. They can, use those funds to improve the community or the thing that they care about, and then look at the entire experience and see what improvements you can make, even from the pictures on the wall in the office. Who's feeling comfortable in the conference rooms and in your physical space? What does that look like? I know here, I'll give you a quick example. Definitely someone a lot taller than me designed the kitchen because the microwave is up here. But what am I going to do? You want to get coffee after it's hot out of a microwave up here? So, I mean, that's just kind of a silly example, but really go through and look at what you have and where you can make it better for people who aren't like the senior leaders or whoever designed your space and your online space as well.
Incredible tips, the both of you. So let's just look out into the future. How far could we take this? And I'll get an idea from each of you. Bryan, what would you love to implement if you're thinking of blue sky, and what's stopping you in this space?
Yeah, the thing that I've always wanted to implement at solidcore, and we just haven't been able to move on it, and I'll talk about why here in a second, is I would love to take our core competency and connect it more deeply to our work in DEIB. And here's what I mean by that, is at the heart of what we do, we are a workout physical exercise company that's hoping to improve the health and wellness of communities. And one of the things that I would love to do is take that core competency. We have, 1,000 to 1,500 people who live and breathe our product every day, and go out into underrepresented communities and help educate around topics of wellness, nutrition, physical activity, etc. Because we know that, we know that things like diabetes, weight, challenges disproportionately impact those communities. And so I would love to, for the next chapter, sort of DEIB at solidcore, for us to take, again, our core competency and apply it to our work in the space in those underrepresented communities. The thing that's been the most challenging, frankly, is just resourcing. And to do that, and to do it really well, and to find the right organizations, or if you're going to reach out to schools, or if you're going to reach out to churches in these underrepresented, whatever it happens to be, however you're going to navigate your way to these communities, and you want to show up as your best self, right? It doesn't want to feel like an afterthought. That's really important for how we show up in all of the things that we do, including DEI work. And so we just have not had the right level of resourcing to be able to pull it off. But I'm really excited about that aspiration, because I do think we will ultimately get there.
Great example. And I'm sure you will. You're a very determined young man. Andrea?
I think there are a million things, but one thing that would benefit the collective is creating a better talent pipeline by investing in, internships, apprenticeships, like getting creative in hiring people who maybe don't have all the skills, but are hungry and willing and ready to learn. And so taking them on, a learning apprenticeship journey and targeting people who may not have the same opportunities as others. So you're looking at underrepresented groups, like Women in Tech is a great one. Girls Who Code, great organization, but helping to build that pipeline, yes, for your own company, but then you're giving people the experience and the years on their resume that they need to either stay with you because you're awesome, or to go on to do better things and maybe come back later or recommend people for your program. But I think by starting at the source of the talent pipeline for people, yes, who are young and need experience, but also people who want to start a new career, who have an incredibly difficult time getting that first job because they're not fresh out of college and they don't, they have more life experience to offer, but not maybe that specific skill they want to grow into. So I think if we could impact the talent pipeline with greater diversity, that would be incredible.
Great. Love both those ideas. So I'm going to shift to the numbers side of things now, I guess, Bryan. So, there is a bit of a saying, anything in R, look out for anything in R, PR, HR, is it always going to be funded as well as it would like? So what impact, in your view, has a strong DEI strategy had on business results, and how do you actually measure this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I hadn't actually heard that phrase before, so that's a good one. So I think I would say a few things, but at the end of the day, they all come back to bringing more people into the solidcore community. It's not unique to ourselves as a company, our industry as fitness. I think everyone over the last 2 years has had a challenging time ensuring that they had enough talent to sort of fill all the roles that they needed to be able to accomplish the things that they wanted to accomplish. And I think us opening the aperture and really making sure that we're inviting in a diverse set of perspectives and individuals into our company has actually allowed us to keep pace and frankly get ahead of the curve in building a talent pipeline that allows us to execute and deliver on the revenue objectives that we've had as a company. So that's been massive for us. On the flip side, we are in a space that from a consumer perspective is also growing. And again, having that representation that I talked about, having that visibility that I talked about has made more and more clients who may not look like the typical boutique fitness consumer, right? Maybe they're a person of color, maybe they're in a larger body, maybe they are a man, and most boutique fitness is women. But when they see themselves represented in our team, it attracts them to solidcore. And so we have seen a massive influx of folks who we typically wouldn't have seen in the boutique fitness industry historically. And so that's been great for our business. As it relates to metrics, it's funny, I think a lot of people would expect me to say something like, oh, we have diversity metrics that we're trying to hit, and we measure, XYZ percentage of, XYZ thing. And while, of course, we survey our demographics of both clients and employees just to understand sort of what those populations are, the number one metric that we are looking for is the same number one metric that we are looking for across our business as a whole, which is what is going to help us drive revenue, because at the end of the day, we are a for-profit business. So the things that I just talked about, right? Getting the right butts in seats, making sure we have talent ahead of the curve, inviting in more clients who are coming in, who may not have experienced this product before, all of those things ultimately tie back to revenue, they tie back to profitability, they tie back to same-store sales growth, the same metrics that when I sit in front of my board, that's what they want to hear about. And so again, that goes back to what I described earlier, which is making sure that the business outcomes and your people strategy are one and the same, and that they're not sort of two different things that are competing against one another, because then that's when you get into the battle around resourcing, right? It's like, I would resource this all day long because I know that I'm getting an ROI that ultimately drives my business.
Mic drop moment. Thank you very much for that. So changing tack a little bit to you, Andrea. So are you finding your exec leaders and partners understand the importance of DEI? And how do you educate and sell them, if needed, on the initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard because we're all humans and we all come with our own biases, our own assumptions, our own experiences. And we're talking about things that can be emotionally driven for people. And I love the example of the visibility driving the business. That is so true, Bryan. And I think the more we can get those personal stories in front of our executive team, or even better, the number one indicator of a successful DE&I initiative at work is if an executive or someone in leadership will share a personal or even somewhat personal story. We are humans. Storytelling is going to win every single time. Metrics are really hard with this because, along with a lot of HR topics, because you're talking about people's inner feelings and how much they're willing to share, how much they feel safe being honest with their team. So if you have a leadership team and a solid HR person who are delivering, who are making it safe, who are, making it inclusive, of course, you're going to be able to get some great results. But for the vast majority of companies that aren't there yet, really hard to measure. And so it can become very difficult to get buy-in because we don't have that 25% growth. I mean, you can do pulse surveys, you can do all of these things, but what it really is going to come down to for your executive partners to understand and support and back it, especially with money, is going to be personal investment, personal stories. And, I did an unconscious bias training. I created that for businesses as a starting place to say, hey, we all have unconscious biases. This is not something to be ashamed of, but it is something to know about yourself. And then that really tends to open people's eyes because it's less personal. And then you can be more objective and move forward versus staying in that fear of the unknown place.
Great, love that. Bryan, is someone particularly passionate about giving back to your local communities at solidcore? And given that you've yet to do what you fully want to do and get out there and share in the underserved communities, how do you walk the talk and how do you get people involved?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about life in general is that you attract what you put out. And one of the things that is a core value of solidcore is this notion of community. Everything that we do, we talk about whether we are bringing people into our community or pushing people away from our community. And obviously we are aiming always to do the former in all that we do. And so as a part of that, it's really critical that we no matter where we operate, that we embed ourselves into the fabric of the local community. A lot of people actually think that solidcore is a mom and pop. People are shocked to find out that we have 100 locations, more than 1,000 employees, because they're so accustomed to sort of solidcore being, again, embedded in the fabric of their local community. So that shows up in a number of different ways. It shows up in local charities that we partner with. So we'll host events at our studio that benefit local charities in the community. We participate in local pride parades. We will do fundraisers at a local school. We do all sorts of things that really speaks to the fact that we know that there's no such thing as a successful business without there first being a successful community. And so we believe that it's incumbent upon ourselves to make sure that we contribute to the overall success of that community.
Great, great, great. And if anyone has any questions out there, please do pop those in the chat and Lucy and I will manage those. So Andrea, switching to you, I read this yesterday, your fabulous little book, which is a quick read, but it's really full of amazing tips. There's an elephant in your office, and this is really focused around, so it's practical tips to successfully identify and support mental and emotional health in the workplace. So you're devoting a lot of time and energy to this space in HR, those experiencing mental health challenges. Could you perhaps share some tips with us, maybe from the book or wherever you feel is warranted, with our audience today? How do we approach this, and how can we build on this within our people plans?
Sure. So, I mean, I could talk forever about it, so I'll keep it brief. I have 3 things that if managers or project managers or leaders or HR people would do, they will absolutely make a difference in the mental health of your staff. So get your pencils ready. So number 1, not going to surprise anyone, but actively listen. And what I mean by this is don't multitask. Even if you think you're sneaky and you could side chat, people know when you're distracted. And if you think that you're pretty good at that, I would challenge you to not do anything else in your next one-on-one. Start with 30 minutes. And see how long you can be present without getting distracted with another task during that meeting. That will give you a great marker as to where you are with being present. The second one is to maintain consistency. So business happens, we need to reschedule, things come up. But as soon as you know that, reschedule. And while you're at it, please don't leave the meeting invite blank. I learned a long time ago that if I just send an invite with nothing in it, and then I say, come in my office and shut the door, panic, right? Fear, I'm going to get fired. I can't listen, much less do whatever you were asking me to do in the first place. So consistency and clear information. And the third one, which I cannot emphasize enough, which I think would be logical to all of us, is to have your employees back and make sure they know that. So when people do make mistakes, which of course we're going to do, especially if we're trying to be creative and push things forward, they need to know that when mistakes happen, you're going to support them, that it is okay to make mistakes and that you'll work through them together, and you're going to get a more creative, dynamic, and productive environment. But if people don't feel safe to fail, you're going to stifle that creativity and you're going to limit your own growth. Because people are just going to do what they know is safe. So those are the 3 I would say. Actively listen, be consistent, and have their back.
I love that. And I just want to do another little shout out. There's just a bunch of tips around dealing with all levels of everything from anxiety through to things that are more serious and obviously are beyond scope. But it really is a great little booklet to really help take the next level in managing mental health within your workplace. So we're doing so well on time. Please let us know if there's any questions out there. We're going to take a little look into the future. So it's been a hell of a three years, let's just say that. Quite a big 36 months, very, very hard on a lot of people, both people managed, being displaced, losing jobs, being furloughed, whatever, the emotional load. And then there's also been some interesting aha moments where perhaps we're spending more time with ourselves, which was much needed. We're spending more time with family, which has been much needed. So there's been such a mix of emotions, positive, negative, and probably something in between. But let's now take us into the future a little bit. And I want to get a little bit beyond. We're in a bit of a bumpy phase at the moment, probably in the next 12 to 24 months, according to our financial panels. But looking towards 2030, where are we taking the people space now? So, Andrea, we'll start with you. What's top of mind for you from a people perspective as you plan toward the next decade?
Yeah, I mean, so many things. I mean, we could do a whole conversation on AI and the implications that that may have for HR, but that's, I feel like, too big to talk about here. So, again, I'm going to go back to being flexible and human centered, because that could mean how we show up and how we work together, but it's also going to be around purpose and different perspectives and different approaches to how work gets done. And one thing that I think is coming like a freight train, and I don't see a lot of people talking about yet, is different types of invisible disabilities and how we can better work with that in the workplace. So I'm talking about neurodiverse individuals who are very competent but may just need a few different accommodations. People with ADHD, which is on the rise exponentially of being diagnosed, and different things like that that we just haven't typically accommodated in the regular workplace up to this point. But I am seeing happen and people talking about more and more. And I think that is going to have to become something that HR teams and business leaders figure out how we want to support in the next decade.
Great, thanks. And Bryan, what about you when you look out to 2030?
Yeah, so many snaps to everything that Andrea just said. Agree wholeheartedly. I think the other thing that's coming like a freight train, that we kind of talk about, but I think we haven't put into focus in the way that we need to, which is that by 2030, senior management at most companies will be almost completely millennials, and mid-level management will be Gen Zers. And so we really have to start thinking about the needs of that population who don't believe, and by the way, I'm part of that population as a millennial, who no longer really subscribe to this notion of living to work, right? It's you're there because yes, you need to have a job and you need to have an income, but like you're working so that you can go out and live life, and so that you can, have space to spend time with friends and family, and you're not putting in the 80-90 hours a week and being a slave to the desk. And so I think we got to think about our role as executives and people leaders a little bit differently, and how we show up really taking care of the whole person, how we might need to think about career pathing differently, how we might think about, to your point, Andrea, this notion of flexibility. Are we going to a 4-day work week, which feels crazy to even say out loud, but maybe that's where we're headed. And I think we have to be open to work in the most general sense evolving to accommodate a changing population of people who are actually doing the work.
Great advice from both of you. Andrea, more immediately, and putting on your HR hat, what do you think are going to be the key challenges that HR teams are dealing with in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most immediate one is still figuring out what normal looks like at this point. Are people being hybrid? Everyone got used to working from home. Now we have to shift again. A lot of caregiving responsibilities have shifted. Maybe people found a workout class that they enjoy in the middle of the day, or a therapy appointment or a doctor's appointment that now is not going to work if they have to be in the seat from 8 to 5. And the problem is there are still a lot of people in leadership roles that think if I can't see you, then work isn't happening. I think we have proven may not be true over the past few years, but we've got to very quickly try to figure out what that limiting belief means, how it shows up, and maybe find a middle ground that is more flexible. Because to Bryan's point, the millennials, the Gen Z, the whole idea that I can only do work in a place and time in which you control is not going to fly. And it really isn't now. And so I think we as HR people have to get creative about what work looks like now and going forward.
Thank you so much. Just an amazing thought around that. Bryan, from a CEO's perspective, what do you think this year is going to bring? How do you think that the macroeconomic environment, cultural shifts, etc., will impact the business, and then in turn your people strategy?
Yeah, look, I think that there's certainly a lot of choppiness that we've all dealt with over the last 3 years. We're longing for unprecedented times, right? It feels like everything that we've encountered has been unprecedented. But it looks like we are in for some additional choppiness this year, particularly on the macroeconomic front with this potential recession that feels like we've talked about for over a year now. But I think with that, people want to find companies that have strong business fundamentals, that grow responsibly, who produce products or services that are differentiated, that they feel is going to have the ability to weather whatever storm may come our way over the next 12 to 24 months. And so I think with that, the way that I view our sort of strategy, or frankly, what I sort of describe as our opportunity, is to make sure that as we are talking to candidates, we are emphasizing and communicating why we are a business that someone should bet on. And we all know that, the ride may be bumpy, and it's going to be bumpy, a little bit bumpy for everyone, but you want to try to find the least bumpy ride, and communicating, again, some of those business fundamentals, and why the opportunity is greater for an individual to come work for you, I think is ultimately what's going to help companies win during this time period.
Great, thank you. And then I'll just ask one more question of each of you before I switch over to Lucy. So if you could do one thing differently this year regarding people, what would it be and why? Andrea, I'll go to you.
Yeah, so I think the one thing that is, unfortunately, I think we're not there yet, but it's definitely happening now, and people need is information about financial resources and managing their own finances. There have been a ton of studies done showing a huge link between financial stress, mental health, and work productivity. The more stress, the worse your mental health, the worse your productivity. And so I think this is an area that we could do better in providing more resources, tools, working with, again, the providers we already work with in the 401k or the EAP, or finding other, reputable sources to give people information about managing their own finances. It's not going to be like, don't get a coffee and you'll be financially free. I'm talking about real tips and tools that we just don't tend to learn. And the reason it matters in business is because it does impact your mental health and your ability to show up and perform.
Right, so going to the root of it, rather than trying to treat at the end. Love it. What about for you, Bryan?
Similar response, which is, just general, more personal and professional development. People want to feel like they are seen as the whole person. To what Andrea was just describing, even though this piece might be, quote, personal, it impacts how they show up professionally. And people want to know that they're at a company that believes in their long-term potential. And the number one way to show someone that you believe in not just who they are today, but who they can be, is by helping them get to who they ultimately can be. And so we're investing, it's a significant line item in our budget for the year, but I still look at it and go, I wish we could do even more on that front.
Great. You're saying all the right things. I'm sure that's why we have you on here. Lucy, perhaps, what would your guidance be as HR teams and execs think about growing and developing their teams from a recruitment standpoint?
Well, again, I think this could be an entire webinar topic on its own. So I'm going to miss out a whole bunch of really important things. But I think what's been on top of mind, and following up from what Bryan said earlier, just around the shift in the market. So we've heard from the financial panels and investors and things like that we're really shifting from that growth, investment into these growth brands towards more of an investment into profitable, sustainable businesses that actually, like Bryan said earlier, have a differentiated product or service. And so I think the knock-on effect of that does impact recruitment, because I think over the last couple of years, there's been high volume recruitment. You've sort of been able to bring people in with high salaries and just, throw together a people plan full of, all these amazing roles and titles. And I think that's going to shift. So I think looking ahead, I think it's more of a focus in terms of recruitment on quality, not quantity. So each seat, I think, is going to be really important. And, if you're Bryan and Andrea sitting with your exec or your board, you're probably going to have to fight for some of these to stay in the people plan. So being really intentional about what the role is. scoping those roles really carefully, and starting from an old boss of mine used to say this a lot, used to wind me up, but he's 100% right, starting from a blank piece of paper. So rather than blindly backfilling every person that leaves, it's like that's actually your opportunity to stop. Let's have a look at the whole team. Where are the opportunities for bringing in maybe some an internal person, giving them an opportunity for personal development, and really looking at that rather than just backfilling every single role. And then I think the third thing is look at being really strategic about where you bring talent from. And Emma, you and I talk about this all the time, bringing talent from where you're going rather than like where you are or where you've been, because that's going to help you get where you're going faster. And so, that may be pulling out of a different industry that's further ahead, or pulling out of, the right level of person from a function maybe that you're growing. And there's always a balance, of course. You can't bring in, someone if there's nothing there to, you need someone scrappier to get something going. But I think that's something that teams should really be thinking about as well.
Great thoughts. Thanks, Lucy. Well, here we are. Who knew we were going to finish on time? So my final question for you both is, I'm really just seeking your final piece of advice for this audience. So given our discussion, what would your final words be? And we'll start with you, Andrea.
Sure. So my last piece of advice here is that self-care is the mental health version of putting your own oxygen mask on first. But I want to challenge you on what self-care means. So it can be a massage or something that costs money, but here's a secret. Most of the time, true self-care is free. And it can be saying no to something that you don't want to do. It could be logging off of social media if that doesn't make you feel good. It could be reading a book or playing games instead of going to a social event, or, spending time with your friends instead of the family that makes you feel bad. So self-care is whatever makes you feel better because you did it. And you need to prioritize doing one thing, even if it's a small thing, even if it's saying no or doing something that makes you feel better every day.
Oh, that's great. Lucy, do you have any final thoughts?
I think mine was just actually circling back to what I said at the start around being really intentional. As an HR person, I'm speaking from that perspective, being really intentional about developing that relationship with your exec. And I think some HR people are really natural in that space, or they have a great leader that brings them on that journey, but others maybe are a little bit scared to do it, or, maybe have that imposter feeling. So I think that's really what I certainly found in my career that was really, really helpful for me. And just a couple of tips maybe to get people started on that journey. If you're not doing them already, you could set up quarterly business reviews with the leaders that you're working with. So really understanding their business and being aware of what's going on. It could be more casual, inviting someone maybe that you don't work with often for a coffee. It's just starting to build that connection. You could share relevant articles or industry news and things like that. And I think that's something that is really important, is about building that credibility as someone that understands your business, not just understands people, or perhaps maybe getting a mentor. It might be someone outside of HR as well. So I think that's what I'm passionate about, is really building those relationships. So hopefully there's a couple of tips there to get people started.
Thanks, Lucy. And bring us home, Bryan.
Yeah, look, honestly, I'm following two incredible ladies who have amazing tips. So I will just emphasize a little bit of kind of what both of them said, which is it's impossible as a leader to pour from an empty vessel. And so over the last 55 minutes, we talked a lot about how we as business executives or people leaders pour into our teams. Just make sure you're finding ways to pour into yourself, or that you're surrounding yourself with people who can pour into you, whether that is reading a book, listening to a podcast, finding an executive coach, taking time for self-care. It can be any number of things, but just making sure that you can show up as your best self so that you can do the work that's required on behalf of your team. And you got to make sure you're not pouring from an empty vessel in order to do that.
Thank you so much. This has been an incredible webinar. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. I think the examples that you've given are tried and true, amazing, open, evolving. None of us has all the answers, but we're all just trying our best and to keep sharing. So Thank you very much to our panelists today. Thank you, Lucy, and thank you to everyone who's joined us either today or on the record. We are all available on LinkedIn if you want more of this story. And congratulations on all the great work that you're doing out there. Keep going. Make sure you're not an empty vessel, and have a great day wherever you are around the world. Ciao, and thank you all for joining this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.